The first step is to flood the cookie with icing. In this case, I was doing a 2 consistency outline and flood, which means that I was first outlining the cookie with a piping consistency, allowing that to dry, and then flooding the cookie with a much thinner flood consistency. This icing is probably a 18 to 20 second icing. It was a little bit thicker than you have to use when you're using 2 consistency outline and flood. So you want to flood this and allow this to dry completely before you move on to the next step, which is the watercolor. In this case, I am using gel colors by Americolor and mixing that with Everclear. You can also mix gel colors with water. I use both. I don't typically have a preference, but usually just use Everclear. Some people have issues using water, so I would try both and see what you prefer. I chose to only use red, yellow, and blue colors and mix them myself so that I could get the rainbow effect. Just takes a little bit of mixing back and forth. I used Americolor Super Red, Americolor Electric Yellow, and Americolor Electric Blue. I do always clean my brush off in between. I think that's really important, but I do use the same brush. Here we are applying the blue. You can see that I'm also painting around the edge of the icing. The icing is a few millimeters thick, so it does stick up off the cookie. If I didn't do this, then you would see a white edge around the cookie. Now, I will say it can get kind of messy when you try to paint around the edge, but it is something that I would definitely recommend. I am blending the blue into the green. I add a little water so it helps me to blend better. And then I clean my brush off and I go back through and do a little more blending with just some water because I didn't like how stark the contrast was between the green and the blue. Adding a little more blue because I didn't think it was quite dark enough. That's the beauty of watercolor, is you can go back and finesse. This next step, I am using luster dust. I have mixed it with Everclear. Please note that this is non-toxic but not edible. I use a fan brush, put very little on the fan brush, and move very quickly, very light, quick brush strokes. The next step is to brush the cookie with cornstarch. The watercoloring can be pretty tacky and sticky, and this gets rid of it. You don't want anything sticky in those cookie bags. Doesn't mix well. The next step is to take a projector and project the image of your skyline onto the cookie. And in this case, I am just outlining it with black piping consistency. I did let this dry just ever so slightly and crust over before I went on to the next step. You can also go on to the next step without it crusting. Maybe try one each way and see what you prefer. You do want to move quite quickly with this next step, which is to apply a pretty thick layer following just the inside of that outline. Again, moving quickly to keep the icing wet. I am using the same exact icing that I used to outline. I'm just applying more pressure on the bag so that I can get more icing out of it. Once this is done, then you take a small brush. Normally I would hold the brush perpendicular to the cookie, but in this case I held it horizontal and flush to the cookie because I liked the thicker pull. This technique is called brush embroidery. It is often used for flowers, but why not a skyline? So I'm just very quickly pulling this icing down to get this jagged effect. I go back through, adjust a few to pull them down a little further.